Chapter 4. Britain under attack, July to September 1940. As the winds of change blew through Europe, by June 1940, Nazi Germany had invaded almost every country to the north, south, east and west of its borders, terrorizing civilians, obliterating cities, and driving back the Allied troops that tried to halt their advance. It seemed that little stood in the way of the Nazis and their total domination of the continent. When Adolf Hitler marched victoriously into Paris, the world could do nothing more than look on in total dismay. But while Nazi forces flooded into France and Hitler's commanders began to enjoy the fruits of their success, there was one nation that refused to capitulate to German domination. Across the Channel, Great Britain was simply not prepared to contemplate peace with Nazi Germany, and as the planes of the Third Reich began to swarm towards British airspace, Adolf Hitler was about to discover that he faced an entire population determined to defend its beaches, towns and cities, no matter what the cost. While the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill rallied the public to fight to the bitter end, the Battle of Britain got underway. Hitler's military supremacy faced its biggest challenge to date. The story of this most historic battle, and the brave souls who fought to defend their island, protecting it from a regime that threatened freedom and democracy in Europe, marked a turning point in a war that had so far seemed impossible for the Allies to win. And as the spirit of Dunkirk remained strong, it was the extraordinary bravery of those who struggled through the dark days when Britain stood alone that would ultimately save not only the United Kingdom, but also their fellow allies from the overwhelming force of Hitler's Third Reich. From the terror of the Blitz to the extraordinary battles fought in the air, not forgetting, of course, the events unfolding further afield in the Far East and the deserts of North Africa, this chapter will chart the first real evidence of the world fighting back against Hitler and his axis of evil. In 1938, the British public had watched King George VI lay a wreath on the cenotaph in memory of the thousands of lives that had been lost in the First Great War. At that stage, few people realized how close the nation now was to facing bitter conflict, and that the peace the world had cherished for almost 2 decades was about to be shattered. However, from the rubble and ruins of the First World War, new and dangerous forces were beginning to emerge. The Italian dictator, Mussolini, was eager to create a new Roman Empire, and Adolf Hitler was rallying the German people to support his demands for more territory and his dreams of a world run by an Aryan master race. When the Nazis had marched into Czechoslovakia in March 1939, past allies, France and Great Britain, were left clinging precariously to the comfort of tradition. The French President, Albert Lebrun, made a state visit to Britain, reassuring the public that the established empires were more than a match for the new dictators. But it was soon clear that fine words and rash promises would never be enough to withstand the terrible storm that was brewing on the continent. As nations were toppled like dominoes across Europe, it was evident that peace was not a word that had any place in Hitler's vocabulary, and the only option was to stop taking a defensive line and go on the attack. Winston Churchill, a statesman who had been no stranger to conflict his whole life long, was also a descendant of one of the greatest military commanders Britain had ever known, Lord John Churchill, who had crushed the forces of the French King, Louis XIV, at the Battle of Blenheim in 1704. Winston as a child had been fascinated by war strategies and battle manoeuvres, and proudly upheld the position of school fencing champion. After attending the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, he graduated 8th out of 150 cadets, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars in 1895. From the Boer War in South Africa to battles in Cuba and India, Churchill travelled far and wide, sometimes fighting and sometimes writing news reports, and on occasions doing both simultaneously. It was clear that the young man seemed to be most at home when he was at the heart of the action, and even when he became a politician as the 20th century dawned, from skirmishes with the suffragettes in 1910 to gangster battles in the East End, it seemed that wherever there was a fight to be fought, Churchill was never far away. Nevertheless, as
Sample complete. Ready to continue?